How many people did you kill?
Not people.
You crazy son of a bitch!
They Live wasn't just a B-movie, it was John Carpenter's war cry. Beneath the cheap sunglasses and one-liners was a brutal satire that mocked Reagan's America, Wall Street greed, and hypnotized consumer culture. Behind every frame lurked chaos, wrestlers replacing actors, fights that rewrote cinema, and politics smuggled into pulp. This is the untold truth behind Carpenter's rebellion, starting with the bizarre pulp story that planted its seed. The roots of They Live stretch back to 1963 when writer Ray Nelson published 8 o'clock in the morning. Its premise was chilling. A man wakes up to find aliens secretly controlling humanity. Nelson later reworked it into a comic called Nada, featuring a drifter hero. 2 decades later, Carpenter stumbled across it, but instead of making aliens the focus, he fused Nelson's paranoia with his own fury at Reagan-era America. Suddenly, pulp fiction became a cinematic scream against consumerism and political corruption. When audiences saw They Live in theaters, the screenplay wasn't credited to John Carpenter. Instead, a mysterious writer named Frank Armitage appeared. Fans hunted for this unknown talent but quickly discovered no such person existed. Carpenter had invented the pseudonym, borrowing the name from an H.P. Lovecraft professor. It was a sly nod to his love of cosmic horror, but also a shield. Carpenter knew his film was political dynamite, so he masked himself to let the story roar louder than the director. Carpenter's first instinct was to cast Kurt Russell, his trusted collaborator from Escape from New York and The Thing. But after 3 films together, he feared Russell's presence would overshadow the role. Audiences would see the actor, not the drifter. Then Carpenter watched WrestleMania 3. In Roddy Piper, he saw raw charisma, toughness, and a working-class grit Hollywood stars couldn't fake. Piper had never heard of Carpenter, but he said yes. That gamble turned They Live into something bigger, a rebellion led by an outsider. Keith David was tired of playing supporting roles, the friend, the soldier, the shadow. When Carpenter offered him Frank, David hesitated until he heard the promise: a fully fleshed-out man with principles, family, and grit. Carpenter added one irresistible detail: Frank would share one of cinema's most legendary fights. That sealed it. David brought grounded intensity that clashed perfectly with Piper's raw energy. Their chemistry was friction and respect, turning what could have been another disposable sidekick into the heart of the film. On a $3 million budget, Carpenter had to cut corners, but the priciest scene wasn't alien cities or propaganda, it was a grocery store. To film the black and white world seen through the sunglasses, every aisle had to be dressed twice. Once with ordinary products, and again with stripped-down commands and skeletal aliens. Add extras, prosthetics, dolly shots and reshoots, and the grocery store ballooned into the costliest location. The result? A surreal nightmare where cereal boxes hid brainwashing and shoppers turned skeletal. What looked like a simple store stroll was secretly Carpenter's most expensive trick and the most unforgettable illusion. The alley fight between Roddy Piper and Keith David is legend. 6 minutes of bone-rattling brawling that rewrote action cinema. Carpenter didn't script the details. Entire pages simply read, "The fight continues." Piper and David trained for weeks in a makeshift gym, agreeing everything could land except face shots. Piper slipped in wrestling moves, while David countered with grit. When cameras rolled, the fight wasn't pretend, it was brutal exhaustion captured raw. Trash cans, car hoods, brick walls, it became ugly poetry. Critics laughed at its length, but Carpenter refused to trim a second. That fight wasn't filler, it was the movie's soul. Carpenter didn't have money for elaborate sets, so he hit Los Angeles streets guerrilla style. Nada drifting past homeless camps, alleys, and skyscrapers wasn't staged. It was shot without permits. Extras weren't hired. They were real people reacting to Piper wandering through their city. Carpenter embraced it, using the raw unpredictability to give his rebellion texture no Hollywood backlot could replicate. In a story about seeing past illusions, this was perfect. The backdrop wasn't fake. It was the real Los Angeles, alive and decaying. The film's truth was built into its very bones. The city itself became Carpenter's most honest set. Nada's camp wasn't a Hollywood construction, it was real. Carpenter filmed in an actual Los Angeles homeless encampment, blending fiction with reality. Residents weren't hidden. They were paid to appear as extras, woven into the fabric of the story. For Carpenter, it was vital. They Live wasn't just about aliens. It was about poverty, invisibility, and the forgotten class America ignored. By showing real lives on screen, Carpenter forced audiences to see the wounds society usually looked away from. The result wasn't just set dressing, it was Los Angeles in 1988. Captured unflinchingly. The film's warning hit harder because it was true. Like most of his films, Carpenter composed the score himself, this time alongside Alan Howarth. But there was no master plan. Carpenter improvised directly over footage. Watching Nader trudge across train tracks, he tapped out a pulsing bass line to match weary footsteps. He layered twangy blues guitar, giving the film its dusty, road-worn identity, then wove eerie synth tones beneath. Even the alien commands came from Carpenter's own distorted voice. The result was stripped down, hypnotic, unforgettable. The score didn't just accompany the rebellion, it was the rebellion. Improvised, raw, and bristling with anger. Carpenter's music became the heartbeat of the uprising. The film's most famous moment.
Come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass, and I'm all out of bubblegum.
Piper brought it from his wrestling days, where he filled notebooks with one-liners for promos. He flipped through his notes, found the line, and delivered it to Carpenter, who loved it instantly. On set, Piper spit it before unleashing shotgun fury in the bank. That single, unscripted joke became immortal, echoed in politics, games, and music. It wasn't written by Hollywood. It was born in the wrestling ring and became the defiant battle cry of a cult classic. The aliens of They Live weren't monsters from another galaxy. They were parodies of the American elite. Their skeletal faces, bulging eyes, and soulless smiles were designed to mirror Wall Street bankers, politicians, and media moguls of the Reagan era. Carpenter deliberately avoided sci-fi cliches because his targets weren't abstract. They were the people running America. The message was viciously clear. Strip the skin from those in power, and you'd find predators feeding off the working class. No claws, no fangs, just corporate greed. By making the aliens grotesque exaggerations of real elites, Carpenter ensured audiences couldn't dismiss the satire as fantasy. The film wasn't saying aliens ruled us. It was saying the wealthy already did, their faces bare for anyone willing to look. On screen, They Live feels like a city overrun with ghouls. In reality, many of those skeletal invaders weren't actors at all. They were Jeff Imada, the film's stunt coordinator. Carpenter wasn't satisfied with how certain extras moved in costume. He thought they looked clumsy, more Halloween party than horror. His solution was simple. Put the pro in the mask, the awkward figure exposed during the hilarious sex scene finale. Thanks to him, the invasion looked massive and unsettling when, in truth, one man was recycling movements across multiple roles. Hollywood illusion at its grittiest. The sunglasses weren't just props, they were the film's manifesto. With them, Nada saw the world in harsh black and white. Carpenter described the glasses as the working-class perspective, the tool that strips away illusions of prosperity and reveals exploitation underneath. The imagery was so potent it didn't stay confined to the screen. Activists in the 90s carried it into protests against globalization and war. Street artist Shepard Fairey launched his famous Obey campaign directly from They Live's subliminal signs, plastering cities with stark reminders of hidden power. What began as cheap plastic sunglasses became a lasting cultural weapon, reframing rebellion as vision itself. John Carpenter never disguised what They Live was. He called it his primal scream against Reaganomics. The aliens weren't fantasy. They were metaphors for the rich feeding off the poor, while television and advertising kept the public hypnotized. Commercials became literal commands to consume and obey, exposing the manipulation hidden in plain sight. Critics at the time scoffed, calling it heavy-handed. Carpenter didn't care. The bluntness was the point. He wasn't aiming for subtle allegory. He wanted a hammer smashing through the noise of consumer culture. Every command on screen, stay asleep, marry and reproduce, was an attack on a society numbed by greed. The scream was raw, political, and angry, and it transformed a low-budget B-movie into one of cinema's boldest rebellions. Roddy Piper didn't think They Live was satire. He thought it was truth. In interviews, he insisted the movie was a documentary, a parable of elites secretly pulling strings while ordinary people suffered. That belief bled into his performance. Piper wasn't acting like a polished Hollywood lead. He moved like a drifter beaten by the world, angry and weary, fighting because no other option remained. Carpenter's gamble on a wrestler instead of a movie star paid off because Piper's sincerity was unshakable. He wasn't delivering lines, he was voicing what he believed. Wrestling may have made him famous, but They Live immortalized him. For Piper, the sunglasses never came off. They Live was originally set for an October 1988 release, but Universal quietly pushed it back to November 8th, Election Day. That timing wasn't random. Carpenter later admitted it was deliberate. The film's release would coincide with Americans casting votes while hypnotized by political rhetoric. The irony was brutal. On the same day voters trusted candidates' polished promises, theaters showed a story about citizens lulled into obedience by alien overlords disguised as leaders. It blurred the line between fiction and reality, forcing audiences to ask, were the ghouls on screen really so different from the ones on ballots? The timing turned a low-budget sci-fi flick into an unflinching political statement. Carpenter didn't just aim for entertainment, he aimed straight at America's conscience. When They Live opened, critics mocked it as clumsy and heavy-handed. Reviews sneered at its political overtones and awkward mix of pulp and polemic. The box office agreed. It limped to $13 million, barely covering its modest $3 million budget. For a moment, it seemed destined for bargain bins. But then came VHS and cable. Word spread about the sunglasses, the bubblegum line, and the alley fight that refused to end. Fans discovered a film critics dismissed as trash, but felt prophetic instead. By the late 1990s, They Live was no longer a flop. It was a cult anthem, spray-painted on walls, sampled in music, and quoted in wrestling rings. It conquered living rooms, proving rebellion sometimes grows stronger off-screen. Hollywood begged for a triumphant ending. Carpenter refused. He insisted Nada had to die, shot down in the act of exposing the alien signal. The final image of truth revealed, but the hero slain wasn't a cheap twist. It was the whole point. This wasn't about saving the day. It was about sacrifice, the cost of rebellion, and the reality that the fight never ends. Carpenter believed a happy ending would cheapen the film's message. Nada's death made him a martyr, flipping Hollywood convention on its head. By the mid-1990s, They Live had achieved cult immortality and studios smelled profit. MGM floated ideas for sequels and even a franchise, but Carpenter shot them down instantly. To him, the story was already complete. "You wake up, you fight, you die," he said flatly. That was the arc. Stretching it into a series would dilute its blunt, uncompromising power. Carpenter believed the movie's strength lay in its finality. One man's sacrifice, not a hero's franchise. Fans wrote scripts, rumors swirled, reboots were teased, but Carpenter never wavered. In an era obsessed with sequels, he protected They Live's purity. By the late 80s, Hollywood sold glossy dreams. Heroes always won, the rich looked glamorous, and America's future gleamed. Carpenter tore it apart. His billboards shouted, "Obey." His money read, "This is your God." His hero died revealing corruption instead of celebrating victory. At first, it shocked audiences, but decades later, its influence was undeniable. Fight Club, The Matrix, even political street art traced their DNA back to They Live, lifted straight from Carpenter's subliminal signs. What began as pulp rebellion evolved into cultural language, used in protests, music, and political discourse. Carpenter proved the loudest screams don't come from blockbusters. They come from scrappy films brave enough to rip illusions away and show the bones. They Live started as pulp science fiction, but became a cultural rebellion. Critics laughed, box offices shrugged, yet fans turned it into prophecy. From bubblegum one-liners to sunglasses that stripped illusions bare, Carpenter's scream against consumerism still echoes today. The fight never ended, it just left the screen and entered our world. The glasses are waiting. The question is, do you dare put them on?